This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad. And tonight we are making a little change, a little addition to the show. We've brought on a new member of the team. I'd like to introduce my friend, Rebecca Lindland. Rebecca, hello.
Sam, hello. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for taking the time to chat with Dan and myself. We've been wanting to get another voice, a different voice with a different perspective on the show. So it's not just these two cranky old guys.
I was gonna say two cranky dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I've known you for more than a decade, but,
yes.
I think, I'm sure there are some people that are listening to this that have seen your face on TV and heard your voice on radio and other places. But for those that are not familiar with Rebecca Lindland, why don't we start off with a little bit of who is Rebecca Lindland?
So I'm a lifelong automotive enthusiast. I really don't remember a time I didn't know every car on the road. And I didn't understand how other people didn't know every car on the road. It's a strange thing. I have 5 older brothers. Some of them are more into cars than others. But as the youngest of 8, I don't know, it just kind of was just always something that I knew every car on the road. And so I was in and out of the industry on and off through my 20s. And finally, in my early 30s, I decided I have to get my act together and figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And I went to work for Allied Signal, which is now Honeywell, and forecasting Bendix brakes. And I did that for a few years. And then I saw a job for Standard & Poor's and went to work for S&P forecasting the whole car. And eventually my division was sold off and it went through several iterations, became what is now IHS Markit. And although I didn't work there at that point, I left in 2013. And then I went to Saudi Arabia for almost 3 years to do work on basically adoption rates of alternative fuel vehicles. So studying people who buy electric vehicles and also looking at people who could have bought an electric vehicle, but did not for a variety of reasons.
Saudi Arabia seems like a weird place to be doing that, given the fact that they have oil and lots of it.
So this is interesting, Dan, and it's a very common question. But the reason that Saudi Arabia and all of the Middle East really is so interested in electric vehicles is because you're absolutely right. All they have is oil, and they actually need to conserve it. By some estimates, including Chatham House, if Saudi Arabia continues to use oil at its current rate, they would become a net oil importer by 2030. Wow. Which is around the corner.
I mean, we're ready to just bake off all our shale and give them the oil here, apparently.
I mean, it's shocking. So for every barrel of oil they use domestically, it's a barrel of oil that they don't sell.
Yeah.
And so they have to start looking at conservation. They have to start looking at getting more fuel efficient vehicles on the road. The market's actually quite similar to ours now it's probably different, but at the time that I lived there, through just about the end of 15, it was about half car, half truck. But the trucks were all SUVs and traditional truck-based SUVs. The big, giant Suburbans and Navigators and Escalades and such. But they have a lot of 4-cylinder engine vehicles. So there's not as much room for improvement when it comes to fuel economy on the car side as we had. We went from 8-cylinder to 6-cylinder to 4-cylinder. And there's not as much use of crossovers because they do a lot of desert driving. Right. And that's a big part of their culture. So they actually need the off-roading capabilities that an all-wheel drive or a rear-wheel drive with four-wheel drive will give you. So It's a very interesting market to study for sure.
Yeah.
But really they've got to conserve is the bottom line.
Well, so the other thing they have a lot of, not to completely derail us, I just find it pretty fascinating.
Yeah, sorry.
They have a lot of desert and a lot of sunshine. So is solar something that they have invested in?
Solar is something that they've invested in. So I was working for King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center, otherwise known as CAPSARC, and we had one of the largest solar fields in Saudi Arabia. Some of our sister properties like King Abdullah University for Science and Technology also had huge solar fields. The problem is the dust and how to clean them. So one of the fields, not ours, but another field, they went to clean them with dust cleaning things and they scratched them. And the efficiency
that is a problem when you're
down.
surrounded by sand.
Mm-hmm. It is a problem when you are surrounded by sand. So solar's a definite option. It's just that they've got to learn how to manage the environment with which they put those solar panels.
What about wind?
Fascinating. Yeah, wind must be good too. You get the wind coming across the desert, right? Like,
I believe it's the lack of consistency in the wind that's the issue. So you'll get really, really windy days, but then other days you really won't have much. And really, in Riyadh, half the year, the climate is very much like San Diego, where it's obviously very low humidity, beautiful sunshine in the 70s. I mean, it's gorgeous. And then, of course, the other half of the year, you're lucky if it gets below 90 at 5 a.m. So it's just the extremes and trying to manage those extremes. The bottom line really is that they've got to look at better insulating their houses and building smaller houses and driving more efficient cars. And they're not really very good at any of those things.
Neither are we.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
That's what happens when the oil's too cheap.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, well, and funny story, a friend of mine had a Chrysler Town and Country over there, and we went, the first time I went shopping, we went to a market, and on the way back, he had to get gas, and I said, oh, hey, Shem, do you want some gas money? And he burst out laughing. He spent a lot of the time in the States, and he starts laughing, and he goes, that's a very nice offer. He goes, it's about, I think it was $12 to fill up his Town and Country. So... Yeah, so he didn't need the gas money.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
So once I got back, then I went to work for Kelley Blue Book, and recently left there at the beginning of January. So now I'm independent.
And where are you calling in from? Are you in the part of the frozen tundra? Or are you?
I am based in Greenwich, Connecticut. I grew up in Southern Connecticut, and right now, as we speak, it's 11 degrees. It was 0 this morning. So
it was quite balmy compared to here.
Yes.
Yeah, it was
exactly.
It was minus 16 when I got up this morning.
Oh, you see, so I'm here in central Massachusetts, in the Boston area as well, but I can't afford anything closer to the city, so I'm in central Massachusetts, and it was like they canceled school for a bunch of the schools around here, and it's like, these people are soft. It was like 0 degrees.
Yes.
It's like, it's cold, yes, but like that's normal cold. Like it happens, and
I
stepped out. 2-hour delay.
Yeah,
I stepped out of the house for the first time in 2 days today.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can understand. Like you guys had minus like 50, when it gets minus 10 or like that gets, but it's cold and it's also kind of arid right now. So like I got out of the car when I got home and I didn't have the coat on, and like if it were actually warmer and more humid, I would have felt colder. So I don't know.
So there was a great stat that I saw. I believe it was from Nora Naughton in Detroit, one of the great reporters in Detroit. And she said that General Motors had the highest percentage of remote starts in the last 2 days. So here it is. So the top
is that,
5,
like using their app?
Yes, the top 5 states for remote start requests over the last 2 days were from Michigan, Illinois, New York, Ohio, and Minnesota.
That makes sense. I'm surprised there weren't more in Wisconsin too.
I know, but I thought that was great.
I'm slightly alarmed that they know that.
Well, if because you can do remote start using the OnStar Remote Link app.
Yeah.
So they have the data, of what kinds of requests come through. You can, and it's pretty easy to figure that out. Because if you're using the app, then it's going to OnStar's control center, and then it sends the signal to the car to start.
Yeah. Well, and I guess it's important as the app maker to know the features that are getting used and not used, and then if they're not getting used, why are they not getting used? Yeah, so okay. Well, I'll take the tinfoil out of my hat on that one. But it's still a little bit like I remote start from the fob. I hope nobody but me in the car know.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm sure it's all aggregated for privacy.
Oh, of course. Yes.
Of course.
Sure.
I'm sure it's completely secure, and nobody would ever be able to find a way to get that information.
Never, ever.
Yeah.
Probably got other, bigger problems to worry about, especially if you use anything that Facebook makes.
Yeah. Okay.
So, well, let's roll into a podcast. So one of the things that we do, since this is your first time on, we talk about the cars we're driving. And I'm assuming that they're in Greenwich. They have a pretty robust fleet in the New York area. So you're driving media cars on a regular basis?
I am. When I'm home, I generally have one or two cars. This week, I have an Alfa Romeo Stelvio Quadrifoglio all-wheel drive.
Such a sacrifice.
Is just so much fun. It's so much fun. I'm not going to lie.
That's I liked that when I actually didn't drive it. I rode in it a while back. I was very impressed with the Stelvio Quadrifoglio.
I went on the launch a year and change ago now.
That was at COTA, wasn't it?
Yes, it was at COTA, which is a great track. I like that track. It's my second favorite. My first one is Laguna Seca.
Of course.
There's nothing like Laguna Seca. And I know that track by heart. I love that track.
Yeah, I figured you'd say Lime Rock.
No, it's funny. It's crazy because it's right in my backyard.
Yeah.
I have only been on the snow track at Lime Rock. I haven't actually been on Lime Rock. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
I know.
I've heard Lime Rock described as going very fast down a hallway. It's because it's not as big.
Yeah, it's a pretty short track.
Yeah, and it's narrow.
Just over a mile long, I think, too.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I would love to see more women taking track lessons, more women just taking. I've actually never taken like the Porsche driving school, and it's something it's something that you don't think about as being necessary to everyday life. But I got to tell you, I learned a lot when we did this. General Motors had an event last year with a bunch of Chevys, and it was the Equinox, and they had a Traverse, and we got to just go for 4 hours driving around in the snow. And you really, you learn a lot in that relatively safe environment of being able to anticipate what your vehicle may do as it slides, as you understeer and oversteer and you kind of catch yourself. And these are things that, I would much rather have people learn in a safe, closed course than on Route 95.
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely better if you can, if you have a chance to practice those maneuvers, somewhere where there aren't other vehicles around, and get used to, things like counter steering.
Right.
I was fortunate, early in my engineering career, the company I worked for at the time, Kelsey Hayes, back in about 1992, sent all of its engineering staff that was working on things like ABS and traction control out to Arizona to take the Bob Bondurant driving school.
Great.
And so we did the 4-day course there, and it was amazing. And then over the course of my engineering career, I spent a lot of time driving around on frozen lakes.
Yes.
Which when you're developing ABS and traction control and stability control, you do these things in the wintertime.
Right.
And then when my kids got old enough, when they were learning to drive, I took them out into an empty parking lot. And I did, I replicated, the skid, giving them the opportunity to to learn skid control, by while I was sitting in the left-hand seat, manipulating the parking brake lever and let them figure out how to counter steer.
That's awesome.
I used to do that to my brother. We were both in high school. He'd be driving the Escort. I just yank the e-brake. Yeah. Uh-huh.
That's awesome.
So tell us more about your thoughts about the Stelvio.
So one of the things I love about the Stelvio is it's visually a beautiful car. It has gorgeous proportions. You want to have that sort of all that rear wheel drive proportion, that high belt line, the low greenhouse. The visibility is not great out the back, and I generally don't have an issue with visibility, but I can see where this could be a little compromised for some people. But otherwise, it's just a beautiful vehicle, and you sit in it and you kind of get wrapped around in it because of that high belt line. There's a great sense of security and kind of like this beautiful, suede blanket that's wrapped around. I love the steering wheel. It has this, it's small and concise, and you have this feeling that you are driving a little rocket ship. And it kind of reminds me of like those little, like the go-karts, like the little F1 carts with the little tiny steering wheel.
It's not the corporate FCA wheel?
Exactly.
No. Even the stop-start button, the engine stop-start button is on the steering wheel. It's not on the dashboard.
It's on the left side. Now, the only challenge with that is if you park on a curve, if you turn the wheel like in San Francisco or something, or just on a hill, it's then not in the right position. So it's a little bit weird in that regard. So you do have to kind of get used to that. But it is very, very much like a little race car. And that's just a lot of fun. It's really fast. It's got a 2.9 liter engine, 505 horsepower, twin turbo V6, 8-speed transmission.
Sounds glorious.
It does.
And the exhaust note is to die for. I mean, I would never deliberately exceed the speed limit, but every once in a while I look down and I think it's a 6, but it's actually more like an 8.
Yeah.
And it just zips around. The other thing I like is, especially here in Southern Connecticut, I'm just outside of New York City, and all you see are black Range Rovers. And I love Range Rover. I love the brand. The vehicles are great. But every once in a while, you just want to be in something a little bit different. And, Alfa certainly does that. And the Stelvio gives that, a lot of utility, but in a super fun pack.
So here's a question, and it's a little bit region specific, but do you have a particular favorite driving route in that area? Because I'm trying to think okay, so you got 95, you got 84 that comes down, you could go up 15 or...
Yeah, so the Merritt Parkway, Merritt Parkway, Hutchinson River Parkway.
The Hutch.
Right. Some of those are pretty good driving. There's in and around Greenwich, Stamford, Westport, Wilton, all that kind of area. It's pretty good driving. There's, some of the roads are very narrow, very small. But I think the Parkway is probably the best place to open it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And to get some movement.
Yeah, Wilton gets a little bit more rural, if I remember. So that's
it does. Yeah. It does get a little bit more rural. Actually, parts of Greenwich are incredibly rural. I mean, Greenwich is big. It covers 60 square miles. So you can, the northern or the back country, as they call it.
Back country. That's where all the Manhattanites are buying up the states, because it's Eastern New York.
It is, exactly, yes. So roads in the back country can get some nice curves going on.
All right. Well, next time I'm down there, I'll have to see.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, and the Stelvio just it goes. The one that I've got which has the all-wheel drive package. And it's got the tri-coat for $2,300. This one is $85,890, which I have to say, obviously it's a lot of money, but it's a lot less than the Maserati Levante, which is, somewhat similar. And I just think it's just all sorts of fun. It does have the driver assist, adaptive cruise control, forward collision warning, all that. That's only about $1,500. Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. I mean, it's pretty well equipped, and again, it's got the heated steering wheel, which is toasty, especially on days like this. So overall, I think it's just an absolutely fantastic vehicle. Tons of fun to drive.
Yeah, I drove the 2-liter Stelvio just about a year ago, just before the Chicago show last year. I had one, and even that one, it was a lot of fun. And it's on the same platform as the Giulia sedan.
Right.
It just sits a little bit higher, and because it's a crossover, you've got the rear hatch. So it's basically like having a Stelvio wagon that's a little bit taller.
It is. And, I was out, I wrote a story for Forbes on the Ferrari 250 GTO that was sold, that went to auction back in August. So when I went to the garage with the owner, who now sold it, Greg Whitten from Microsoft, he has a Stelvio. He has a Giulia. At the time, he had a Giulia, and he actually told me when I saw him at CES that he traded in and got the Quadrifoglio, the Stelvio Quadrifoglio, because he needed a little bit more room. But one of our friends, also another tech guy, also has a Giulia, and then a guy that takes care of another tech billionaire's stable of vehicles, he pulled up in the Giulia as well, and they didn't even know that they had all bought them. So there's this sense of it's kind of like the runabout car is of the tech billionaire set is clearly the Giulia.
Some runabout car. Is it because the fond memories of what Alfa used to be, or is it just?
I think it's just fun to drive. Yeah, I really do. I think it's fun to drive. The seats kind of, again, it's sort of reminiscent. It's when you don't want to take your Ferrari out, this gives you that same kind of fun feel.
Yeah. And, it does have that same kind of Italian feel. There's certainly a lot of Ferrari DNA in it. Ferrari worked with Alfa Romeo to develop that twin turbo V6 that's in there.
Yeah.
And, so it's got that kind of feel to it. And I've driven the Giulia Quadrifoglio a couple of times, and I drove the Stelvio Quadrifoglio at Road America last spring during the Mama Spring Rally.
Oh, that's fun.
And yeah, I mean, it was phenomenal there.
Yeah.
And I think, if you live in a place like Michigan or Connecticut, and someplace where there's winters, and you want to be able to drive it year round, I think, the Stelvio definitely has an advantage with that, bit of extra ground clearance, because last year, when I got back from the Chicago Auto Show, we had been hit by a snowstorm, while I was on my way back, and there was supposed to have been a 2-liter Giulia delivered to my house while I was gone. Turns out they brought the Quadrifoglio back again, and it has about 3 inches of ground clearance. And when you have 8 inches of snow, that's just not a good combination.
That's sub-op.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And so you were also driving the MX-5 Miata.
No, it's the I've got the CX-5.
Oh, CX-5. I'm sorry. I looked quickly.
The CX-5, which, to be very truthful, I haven't driven it yet. So it got dropped off at the same time. There was a little bit of a double booking issue, and I got tied up at the dentist yesterday, and not in a good way. And so I haven't had a chance to drive it yet. And like Sam, I barely left the house. Yeah. So tomorrow, this weekend, I'll be taking out the Mazda.
Yeah, we can. I've actually got a CX-5 in the driveway right now as well. And so why don't we come back to that next week? Do you have the turbo, the new 2.5 liter turbo?
I don't think so. I haven't even pulled out the Maroni. I'm sorry. I've been really bad. Well, what else? What else I just had too was the Jeep Wrangler, the new one. Have you had that yet?
Yes.
What did you think of it?
I was stunned and delighted. Absolutely. My brother has a 2015 that I, at 5 feet tall, I can barely get in and out of that thing. And it's just not an enjoyable vehicle to be in my opinion. This new one, I had the Unlimited Sahara 4x4. I absolutely loved that thing. I felt like a total badass in it and that I could just go conquer the world. And it was super comfortable. It was kind of loud on the highway for sure because I had the cloth roof. But otherwise, I just absolutely loved it. I was delighted with it. It was so much fun.
Did you have the 2-liter or the V6?
Let me look at it. I had the 2-liter inline 4.
See, okay. I haven't driven that one yet. I do think they've refined the Wrangler quite a bit, even though it's still a Wrangler. So I was impressed with that. But I wish I could get my hands on a 4-cylinder. I'm sure there's going to be one coming my way soon. Because I think that's got to be a big difference.
It really was. I mean, I was absolutely amazed. Now, granted, it's $53,000. Yeah.
It's shocking how expensive Wranglers have gotten.
It didn't have heated seats. It didn't have heated seats.
What?
I know. We were shocked. I've got my nephew with me, and I was like, Jake, I said, you have to read through this. Am I missing something? We couldn't find them anywhere. And I was like, wait a minute. How does this not have heated seats? It didn't have heated seats.
That should have everything.
$53,000.
Yeah, that should have everything for $53,000. So I still go back to, I was complaining on Twitter about this the other day. So the Wrangler has become this kind of like outdoorsy Camry, right? They're just everywhere. And they sell to people who just use them to commute, it's fine. You can buy what you choose, but it's just such it's a commitment to live with every day. And as much as I love the Wrangler, I get so tired of it after a week with it. You know, it's stiff-kneed and just. So
that's the difference. Is that, Dan? That was my feeling on it. That was my initial thought was, all right, this will be fine for a couple of days. I actually loved it. And my sister-in-law used to have one years and years ago. As I said, my brother has had 2 now back to back. And this one was so refined. It was shocking in its livability. Like, cause I do the same thing. I look and I'm like, really? Like, and Wrangler, the great thing about Jeep is it's the brand of busboys and billionaires. It's right. You can see it in everybody.
If you start off as a billionaire, a Jeep will make you into a busboy. How do you make a small fortune in a Jeep? Yeah.
But everyone buys one. It's such an accessible brand. So I was absolutely delighted by the Wrangler. Absolutely delighted. I couldn't believe it.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I found the current one vastly superior to the last generation one, but it's still not a vehicle that I would ever want to own.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I still think, what I liked about it was, first of all, certainly that ground clearance, that sense of, if it snows, it doesn't matter. You can get to wherever. Yeah,
you don't care about weather in that thing.
You don't care about weather in that thing, and
except for extreme cold with the lack of heated seats. But
that was sub-op for sure. Yeah. But I remember as a kid, my brother and I were coming home. We were actually coming home from church from a youth group meeting one night, and this girl had slid off the side of the road, and we got out to help her. Although we couldn't really help her, but at least we could be there. And I remember this guy pulling up in this totally tricked out Jeep Wrangler, and he said, oh no, I'm sorry. He pulled up in a 911 and he said, hold on, I've got a Jeep Wrangler with a winch at home. I'll be right back.
Of course, he pulled up in a 911.
Right? And this total superhero comes back, and my brother and I looked at each other, we were like, that's the perfect garage.
Yeah, no kidding. Jeez. I was going to say, Sam, like when you get that hunting lodge up on the UP, you might want a Wrangler.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Or a G-Wagon.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing, when I saw the new Jeep, the one that I had last summer was the hardtop 4-door. And actually from behind in particular, I don't know if you've looked at spent much time looking at the hardtop version, Rebecca, but from behind it looks so much like a G-Wagon now.
It does,
especially
this
like
one
it's
did
silver.
Too.
Yeah, the silver one looks just like a G-Wagon from behind now.
That, you know what, my nephew said the same thing. He said this looks just like a G-Wagon, and I agree with him. It does.
It's got again. It has much.
It doesn't cost nearly as much, but it's got these great proportions to it. Mm-hmm. It's a big square, and I love the improvements that they've done with it. There's such great detail in the lights. It's just, they've paid a lot of, they paid a lot of respect to the brand. And one of the things that I've been looking at the market is who is a good steward of their brand. And I think that Mike Manley and the people at FCA have been really, really good stewards of the Jeep brand.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, they have to be. I mean, that's
the cash cow.
Right. That's the goose. And especially the Wrangler. Although the Wrangler's it's expensive because I think it's expensive to build as well.
Yeah, but even the rest of the Jeep lineup, even things like vehicles like the Renegade and the Compass, especially the current generation Compass.
Yes.
They've really gotten so much better, and they the first generation Compass was a terrible vehicle. I mean, there's just no way around it. It was awful.
Yes.
But the second generation and the current Cherokee and the Renegade, those are all vehicles that really, they deserve to carry the Jeep name, especially, when you get the Trailhawk versions. I mean, those are all legitimately capable off-road vehicles.
Yeah.
And they deserve to be called Jeeps.
Well, and my experience with actually sort of Jeep shopping is that they're smart enough to make those trail-rated versions of everything that they make, but they also know how to package them so that the people who want the brand and the perceived all-weather capability and ruggedness and whatever else Jeep says, because it's Jeep, they package it in such a way that you can get into it and you can get a reasonably, amenable vehicle. It's got the stuff the features that you want. It's not necessarily as hardcore because not everybody's going to want or appreciate the Trailhawk, but they're going to really, really like the Latitude. And they make that actually quite affordable and very, very competitive. And the Compass, I mean, they did a fantastic job redoing that to the point where I think it encroaches on the Cherokee. They're sort of stacked right up on each other. But you look at the Jeep lineup now versus, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, they've been very good stewards. They've done a very careful job with Jeep.
Yeah. They have. So I drove the week I started at Kelley Blue Book, I was flying out to Irvine for 2 weeks, and I rented a Jeep Compass.
Oh, that was the old Compass, right?
The old Compass. Oh. It was
bad.
Yeah.
It was so awful. I think, starting a new job, there's so much going on. I had only been back in the country a couple of weeks, and I couldn't get myself, I couldn't organize myself enough to go to Long Beach Airport to get something else. But it was close to that. It was so horrible. I dreaded driving that thing. But the new Compass, I just had that about a month ago or so. And that, again, was just terrific.
Yeah, it's lovely.
It was really great. Again, a cute, fun, relatively inexpensive. I think mine was in the low 30s, and just great. We actually got a little snow the week that I had it, and so I took it to the beach just to get some prettier pictures of it and such. But again, it's that nice sense of this is a Jeep. It's going to handle pretty well. Of course, it's just all-wheel drive, but you still have that sense of confidence that it's still a Jeep and it still looks like it's fun and fun to drive. And again, they've done a fantastic job with the brand.
I agree.
Totally agree.
All right. Well, we're in agreement. And you win a prize for driving the sort of the nicest, most pricey stuff. Cause I mean, you got to keep up appearances in Greenwich too.
Yeah, exactly.
But Sam, you've been in the Hyundai Santa Fe.
Yeah, I spent a week with the Santa Fe after I got back from Utah last week, and the last generation Santa Fe I was actually surprisingly underwhelmed by. I had driven the Santa Fe Sport last time around for about 2 years ago, and it did not really impress me very much. This one, though, is such an enormous step forward for Hyundai. And what Hyundai's done this time around with the Santa Fe, they actually split it up again. When they 10 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago, they had the two-row Santa Fe as a compact crossover, and then when they did their first three-row crossover, they called it they brought it out as the Veracruz, and that one didn't sell that well for a variety of reasons. But then, when they redesigned those, they put both the Veracruz and the Santa Fe on the same platform, and they made or the replacement for the Veracruz. They made the three-row and called that the Santa Fe, and then the two-row was the Santa Fe Sport.
So that was confusing.
Yeah. So now they're back to the two-row being just the Santa Fe, and they've just launched the new Palisade as their new big three-row crossover.
Well, but they've also got the three-row Santa Fe, right, which is the Santa Fe XL?
Not in North America.
Oh.
I don't think they're still selling the old Santa Fe as the XL for the time being, but that's going to go away, I think, later this year. So there's no,
that's what I see.
Yeah, there's no direct three-row version of this Santa Fe, but the design of this thing has changed pretty dramatically, and it's kind of a step in a new direction for Hyundai. It actually, when you look at it from a distance, it actually looks quite a bit larger than it actually is, because it's much more. It's much boxier and kind of chunkier looking than the last generation one. But when you get up close to it, you realize it's actually not that big. So it's kind of a weird visual. What's the word I'm looking for?
Optical illusion.
Optical illusion. Yes, thank you. So it. I think it actually looks really good. And it's got kind of bolder styling than the last one did. They've adopted some stuff, some elements from the Kona. So you have those slim horizontal lights at the top of the corners, and then the bigger headlights down below. This new version of the Hyundai Grill. That they've been doing for the last couple of years. The chrome strip that goes all the way across. That ties everything together. So I think it's a good looking vehicle. Inside it's got a surprisingly premium feel to it. I mean, this one almost felt like something that would fit in quite nicely as an entry level Genesis crossover. And the overall, I thought it drove really well. It's got the 2-liter turbo in there with about 250 horsepower. Sounded a little bit on the coarse side. The engine didn't sound quite as refined as kind of what the rest of the vehicle, kind of the perception the rest of the vehicle gave you. But overall, I thought it was really good to drive, and got pretty decent fuel economy. Got like 24 miles per gallon.
What did you have for the engine?
The 2-liter turbo, which I think is the only engine in there right now. Or it may have a 2.4 as well, the naturally aspirated 2.4. But and this one, it was really well equipped. It had all the driver assist features, the adaptive cruise and lane keeping and everything else. And this was the loaded one. It was the ultimate, and it was just shy of $40,000.
That's a lot more than it has a lot more features than a Jeep for 53.
That's true, but you can't take the doors off of this one or the top off.
You can,
and I certainly think you don't want to try taking this one down the Rubicon Trail. I mean, it was fine in the snow, but you don't want to go crawling over boulders in this thing.
Okay, yeah, I'll agree with that. I mean, it's a good family SUV, right? And that's what they've been making for a while, and. Tech-wise, I'm assuming it had the typical mix of good, easy-to-use infotainment.
Yeah, it's got the same interface that you'll find on any other Hyundai or Kia model built in the last 3 or 4 years. With support for Android Auto and CarPlay, and even the stock OEM infotainment system is pretty easy to use. Everything's pretty straightforward. It has nav. So everything that you would expect is there, including heated seats and a heated steering wheel.
But I mean,
which you can't get in a $53,000 Wrangler.
This is true. Yeah. Okay. All right. Did we lose Rebecca, or is she just listening intently?
I'm listening intently.
Oh, she's listening intently.
Have you driven the Santa Fe, Rebecca?
I was thinking about it. I don't believe I have. I was trying to think back on my vehicles. I just had did I have the Kona? I don't think so. I've got to look back. I don't think I've been in Hyundais in a little while. They kind of go in waves.
Yeah.
I do like that the Kona sort of set the design direction for Hyundai's newer range of SUVs. There's some of those Kona elements in this new Santa Fe.
Yeah.
Right, but it's also a little more grown up looking. It's not quite as kind of funky as the Kona is.
I did recently drive. Well, I shouldn't say recently. I drove the Genesis G70 over in Korea, and that was really, really good. Really good.
The sedan or the
sedan?
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. The sedan. I've got to look because what is the what's the Kia version of the Hyundai Kona?
There isn't one directly right now. They've got the Soul. They kind of brand as a crossover. And I think it's actually sharing the Kona platform.
Right. It must have been the Kona that I had. I have to look back and see because I only had it for a few days. But overall, Kia and Hyundai have done an incredible job of upping their game and putting out really, really good product that, and yes, their prices have gone up a little bit, but, overall, I think they've just done a fantastic job, just continuously getting better but keeping their Koreanness, if you will, and again, being good stewards of their brand and what they do really well.
Yeah. And while the prices have crept up, compared to their competition, in the same segments, they're not more expensive. They're comparable. So there's still a really good value, and at any given price point, you get a lot for what you're paying. And I think, as you said, they've been good stewards of the brand. They, the last couple of years, they've struggled a bit on the sales side because they were pretty sedan heavy in their lineups.
Right.
And they're getting some fresh crossovers in there now and some additional stuff like the Kona, which is doing really well. And I think, that's going to help them going forward with the Kona, the new Santa Fe, and then the Palisade coming over the next few months. I think they'll be in pretty good shape going forward.
Yeah, that Palisade, it really is gorgeous. I had lunch, was it I think Friday, with friends of mine who work for Genesis, actually, but I was at the Hyundai World, U.S. headquarters, and there was a Palisades there in the parking lot. And, when we see, a lot of times we see these vehicles, like in a showroom or at an auto show or something, but it's different to see it out on the road. And that thing had some great presence, beautiful proportions. As you mentioned, like the narrow headlamps, it looked really good. It was definitely a head turner. And to see it in the parking lot, it stands really tall. It definitely has a presence about it that the Santa Fe just doesn't. So I'm excited to see how Palisade is received.
Yeah. I think that's one thing that Hyundai and Kia are both very good at is, and I've said this before, their design team, they didn't skimp on design. They attracted a lot of guys from, the premium German brands. And now they've got the driving dynamics to go with it. Now that they grabbed, was it Albert Bierman?
Yeah.
So they've really aggressively delivered cars that drive like $1 million and cost a lot less than that.
Yeah,
just a very high value thing. And they look really good too. They're unique. They stand out, and they're sort of finding their. I don't even know if it's a second wind, but it's just like they're really finding their design footing where they don't look derivative of anything else on the road now. And that was always the thing is they, especially even the last Santa Fe, for example, it looked good, but it didn't really look distinctive. Now it's much more distinctive now. And that's happening across the lineup.
I think that one of their challenges is just people getting on the consideration list. That's always an issue for them. People think of it as a bargain brand, and it's really not. And it doesn't deserve that nomenclature anymore. It's a legitimate brand that you really should think about. I think it's, like we just talked about with the Santa Fe XL, Santa Fe Sport, the Veracruz, the Palisade. They're going to have some marketing challenges getting these names out there, getting people familiar with what is the Palisade, and keeping people straight on what's what. Now, I think one advantage they have is that Palisade looks absolutely nothing like the Santa Fe. I mean, it's really very much its own vehicle. So I think that'll be a good thing, but it's a lot of money to try and launch a nameplate, and getting people to think about that nameplate. And so that will be interesting to watch how Palisade does and how it's received in the marketplace.
Yeah. Well, and look, I mean, if they're not necessarily a bargain brand, they're still a high value brand. And, I think if they want to put their resources behind establishing those nameplates, they're going to be successful at it. And, nobody makes new names and then throws them away with all the equity better than American brands. So if they just stick with it for a little bit longer, they'll do okay.
Yes.
That is a problem that Ford has.
Yeah. they all do it. I mean, just the list of names is just ridiculous. If you go through for the last, say, 50 years, just stuff that's come and gone. All right, the last thing that
what about you?
Has been in the garage, I got a 2019 Dodge Charger all-wheel drive, and it's shockingly like the 2007 Dodge Charger all-wheel drive. It's a very good car. I'm impressed with how fresh they can make this car feel. It's a big sedan. It drives tidy. It's comfortable. All of the controls are quite easy to figure out. The materials, ever since they did the lash up with FCA, the materials in the interior are great. I think Chrysler or FCA does some of the best interiors in the business for the price. And this car is no different. I think they've redone the dash pad for this year, or this particular model package I have has it almost looks like like a leather wrapped dash. And in the Charger, there's a lot of dash. It used to look like this big Rubbermaid thing that was all one piece, and they've tried to make it, I think, look a little bit more stylish. But it's a good car. It's very, very stable in the crappy weather we've had. It's one of those cars that's sort of like it's always going to be there. And it's a good recommendation. It's hard to argue with it, and it's a high value car.
Pentastar or Hemi?
Pentastar.
Okay.
Which it's no slouch. I needed to pass 3 cars in a row on the highway tonight, and I just put my foot down, and the needle was pointing at 9 something. It's like a 300 horsepower engine. It just goes just fine.
I would take one over the Slant 6 in my dad's old 73 Dart any day of the week.
I remember taking my friend Jesse when I was in high school. He had a 71 Valiant with a Slant 6 and a broken torsion bar, because they all did. We cranked that thing up to
either that or saggy rear leaf springs.
Right. Well, or both. We cranked that thing up to about 110 one day. It took a very long time to get there, and it was terrifying. So
I'll bet.
This was not terrifying. You just put your foot down and you go. You don't need the Hemi. The Pentastar does just fine, especially with I think it's the 8-speed auto.
The 8-speed auto. Yep.
Yeah. It's a really good match, and all-wheel drive in this platform. It's great in the Charger. It's great in the Challenger GT. Like this, it's just a good car. It may not be everybody's thing, but it's a good big car. So
I love the Charger because I think it just celebrates American muscle, and too often that's shunned when I think it should be celebrated. It's that I love the Dodge tagline of domestic, not domesticated.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
It's such a fantastic celebration of domestically oriented people. Not everyone wants a passport. Not everyone wants to go explore the world. And that kind of mindset, that domestically oriented mindset, needs to be celebrated more than it is.
I agree. And, I just wish that they would consider bringing back the Magnum, because I think, we're at a time when, perhaps, maybe now is the Magnum's time, jack it up, a couple inches, put some plastic wheel arch extensions on there, call it a crossover. And I think it would be perfect right now.
No, it was definitely ahead of its time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and the whole wagon kind of conversation is one that's really interesting also because baby boomers and for background, I do a lot of work looking at generational analysis and trends and how your growing up experience affects your attitude towards different products and such. And so for baby boomers, a station wagon was not aspirational. That's one of the reasons they moved to SUVs.
They aspired to get out of station
They
wagon.
did, exactly. But what's interesting is that, when the Buick Regal Tour X first came out, I went on that launch last year, and a friend of mine from California, as undomestically oriented as you can get, he contacted me. He's like, he goes, I can't believe I'm asking you about this, but what did you think of that car? And it was all sorts of fun to drive. The Regal Tour X with the torque vectoring, it was great off-road, not hard off-road, but, just general. It was a lot of fun. And I told him, I said, I think it's a great vehicle. And this is a typical millennial attitude. He's in his late 30s and is like, I've grown up with are SUVs. I want something different. And it's that crazy kind of cyclical thing that you don't want what your parents have. Right. And so, the wagon, there is opportunity for well-placed, low volume wagons, I think, to really make a statement, especially in what I call the trophy generation, the millennials that are older, that are the trophies. I know. And I say that with love.
It's all the boomers' fault, just as much as the boomers are sort of the result of the greatest generation, just conspicuously consuming everything in sight. But yeah, I agree that there's definitely, I've been very curious about the tastes and desires of folks that are a little younger than me, in their 30s and 20s.
Yeah.
Because they are different, and there is that reaction against the SUV, and part of it is the living arrangements are different, where they either if they're in a more urban environment, or even with the sprawl that we have, you don't have to be directly in the city to still have a tight parking situation where you're renting and it's a multifamily house and there's only so much space in the driveway.
Right.
So you need something small or cheap, because if you're going to street park, it's just going to get completely destroyed. So
right. And they're probably. It is, and I think it's also important. And I don't want to completely derail us. I could talk all night about this.
We can roll into.
It's important also to remember that because of the Great Recession, that you can't block all millennials together. There's not, it's only the Great Recession, but it's also just technology. So you can't look at millennials as one generation. They had very different growing up experiences, in some cases, even within the same family, where, you know, if you're like mid to late 30s, your parents, you know, pretty much, I mean, they were overindulgent baby boomer parents. And, you know, and that's why I called them trophy generations, because they did show up and get a trophy. But people like 30 and younger, like even 18 to 30 that graduated college or, you know, post recession, they actually saw their baby boomer parents lose everything. And you know, and lose their job, lose their houses in some cases, and end up in their late 50s and into their 60s with not a single stamp in their passport.
Well, so I'm curious about where those people fit, because, like, are they boomers? Are they echo boomers? And there's like, you can really stratify the generations, but, you know, it's weird. There's this weird sort of group of parents that are not as old as my parents, who are early boomers, and they're in their 70s. You know, they're early 70s now. There's these folks that were born after, you know, 1955, and that's sort of like the second wave of the boom, right? Like, or where do they fit? Not to get too...
Right. Yeah. So the second wave of the boom, their kids now are basically 30 and younger in some cases. I mean, the birth year, baby boomers typically are 1945 to 1964, and then Gen X is 65 to 77. And then
got it just into the wire.
Yeah, and then 78 was traditionally Generation Y. That was what they were first called. Right. And then it kind of evolved into the millennials. But absolutely, your parents have influence on your growing up experience. But again, what demographers and sociologists are finding is that your friends and the world around you has a lot more influence, especially with the internet. So people in their 20s, I call them really the social generation, you know, the social media generation, because that is how they communicate with each other. But even what's interesting is even kids 20 and younger have a different relationship with different social media outlets like Snapchat. So Snapchat for people in their mid 20s is a way of intimate conversation between like a boyfriend and girlfriend. And you don't Snapchat with people of the opposite sex. You only Snapchat with your significant other. Whereas for younger people, like 20 and younger, they Snapchat with everybody.
Yeah, well, they like the filters, the little, like the faces and
all those goofy little things and stuff. But so, you know, because technology is moving so quickly, and because adoption rates of technology are now measured in months and years as opposed to years and decades, your relationship with that technology is different just based on, it could just be a couple of years difference in your age. So all that kind of translates into how you communicate and how you interact with different vehicles as well. And that's why marketing gets so tricky, trying to market these different vehicles, because what appeals to a 38-year-old millennial is not the same as what appeals to a 28-year-old millennial.
Well, Sam, did I hear you trying to?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm just absorbing this, you know, and
the master
pondering the fact that I have, you know, the couple of times that I actually tried to figure out Snapchat, it just completely befuddled me. You know, and you know, and as somebody, you know, who is, you know, an engineer and, you know, generally a pretty techie kind of guy, you know, every time I tried to open that app, I was just completely lost. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. So clearly I was far too old to be using it.
Yeah, you know what I can't use? I can't use at all is Pinterest. It frustrates the hell out of me. Because it's like you get the pin board, okay. Fine. And my wife uses it, so maybe this is a good sort of place we can actually take the topic, because we can bring it around to cars. But like my wife uses it, and it's like a pin board. But I'm like, why do I have to click off the app to see the thing? And I understand the idea, but as an app maker or as somebody who works in marketing and like direct response marketing, the last thing I ever want to do is give somebody an exit off my site for the thing that they want. No. You have that in my platform. And you see that with like Facebook. Facebook doesn't let you out. They want it all native. Because,
right.
So Pinterest, like, it confuses me. There's just a paradigm, and I cannot make it go. It just frustrates me. But, what do you see as like the divide? Because we've seen, okay, there were boomers, and they had station wagons when they were kids, so they didn't want station wagons, so they graduated to minivans. There was that whole proliferation of minivans when I was a kid.
Sure.
And then we've moved to SUVs. The Ford Explorer really was the first one that kind of kicked that off back in '91. Like, I just remember that it's exploded on the market, and then everybody had one.
Right.
And now we've moved to the car-based SUVs, so the crossovers, and they're sort of like they're in that place where that if everybody who critiques the cars hates them, that's the most popular thing. And like that's what we're seeing. Nobody will really, or begrudgingly coming around, right, to saying like, we're sad that wagons with manual transmissions are going, but these crossovers, like, they're not that bad. And so I wonder if part of that is there's this dominant group of men who seem to critique all of the cars, and then there's actually women who buy most of the cars or drive, 50 to 80% of the high dollar purchases in the household. And so, like, are we seeing that, the enthusiast press is catching up to reality, where the people who are actually buying the cars are driving what the cars are?
Go ahead.
That's a multi-part question. I'm sorry. I stumped everyone.
I mean, I think, we certainly, I mean, there's a level of circuitousness in every, the cycle will always kind of go around. But I think that one of the things that where we are today in the car market, particularly when it comes to SUVs and crossovers, is that because we have shared platforms now, we can do iterations of these vehicles to suit everybody. And, like with the Honda Passport being built on the exact same platform and with the same wheelbase even as the Honda Pilot, but delivering a very different ownership experience and a very different driving experience. We're able to almost personalize and customize vehicles. So you can build profitably 40 or 50,000 of something, or 30,000 of something, because you're actually building 150 or 200,000 of something else. And so
you're using most of the same parts over and over again.
Right. And you've got economies of scale, particularly with things that consumers never see, like wire harnesses and, all the kind of the underbody stuff. The HMI can be exactly the same. So all these kinds of things, you can get economies of scale. This means that we have the opportunity to both personalize and customize products for very narrow striations within the marketplace. And so then you start to get people that are like, well, you know what? They actually do have exactly what I need. And since most people really are pretty practical in their car buying, they look and say, you know what? A crossover pretty much checks all of the boxes that I need from both an emotional and practical standpoint.
So let me throw in my 2 cents worth here. In my household, over the last almost 20 years, we've had several cars that have been my wife's primary car. When we first got married, she was driving a Mercury Sable, and 2000. So am I. But in 2000, wanted to get a new car, and she did not want an SUV or a crossover, and she actually wanted a station wagon. Our kids were still relatively young at the time. They were, under 10 years old. And, so we got a Volkswagen Passat wagon. And despite all the issues we had with it, in 2009, we turned around and bought another Volkswagen station wagon.
So it's okay if the windows don't go up and down every time?
Okay, it's a surprise.
As long as the driver's window would go up and down and the sunroof would open, the rest was okay.
Look, I'm comfortable. I don't know why you kids keep complaining.
Okay. So the rear passenger side door won't lock. Just don't leave anything valuable in the car. Right.
That just means you leave a sign on the seat that just says rear door won't lock, and then they won't smash the window.
Exactly. Just open it up. Don't break the glass. Just open it up.
I love my Volkswagen.
Well, and my traditional line has been Volkswagens are great cars to drive and terrible cars to own.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I think that has actually, perhaps hopefully changed somewhat because they now have a 6-year, 72,000 mile warranty on them. Yeah. So, at least it's not, at least for the first 6 years, you're not going to be paying, a hand over fist for everything. But, the thing is, once we sold back the diesel wagon to Volkswagen a couple of years ago, my wife, we wanted another station wagon. She still, even in 2017, did not want to get a crossover. Mm-hmm. And, she likes driving cars. She likes car driving dynamics, but liked the utility of a wagon. Sure. And, in the absence of anything, in the price range that we wanted to pay, in the size class that we wanted, we didn't want to spend, $80,000 or $90,000 on a Mercedes E-Class wagon, We ended up buying a Honda Civic hatchback, because that was the closest thing we could get to a wagon that wasn't a crossover, that wasn't jacked up, because she did not want that kind of car. She likes driving that car. So maybe she's just an outlier, but she's an outlier that's married to me, and I like that.
Well, I think it depends on what. So there's a difference between what they classify the car as, or what we classify the car as, and what other people see in the car. Something like the Honda Accord Cross Tour. That's an Accord wagon. It was not really sold as a wagon, but it was essentially a wagon, and it's great for what it is. We had our day calling it ugly and whatever, but it was actually pretty good to drive. The BMW 3 Series GT and 5 Series GT, those are. I guess they're hatchbacks because they're
hatches.
Yeah, there are wagon versions of those cars, but again, like they're not the full-on sort of trucky like faux SUV crossovers, but they do have some increased ride height and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess it really depends on where they're trying to position the vehicle, and I think also. Like older folks, and I say this because you're thinking about the boomers who are aging now, right? They're in their 70s, so they've got stuff like trick knees and bad hips. And I remember minivans were popular with like the greatest generation folks that I knew. For the same reason that they're easy to get in and out of.
Having that higher hip point.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that to scoff at it. I think that's actually a legitimate.
Yeah, no. Well, and the funny thing is, back in the mid 2000s, that was exactly Ford's argument when they did the 500, the Ford 500.
And you know who bought them?
Well, pretty much nobody.
I see a lot of them that have been very gingerly used by folks.
But that was the thing with the 500 is they made a taller sedan. And they talked a lot at the time about that higher, having that higher hip point, more like a crossover, but for people that, wanted a sedan, and, some people even bought them.
Yeah. A few. All right. So, we mentioned the Passport, and you got to drive the Passport.
Both Rebecca and I drove it last week.
Both of us did.
Okay. So I have seen sort of mixed takes on this. I was very interested in the Passport when it debuted before anybody got to drive it. You know, it looks like a tidier Pilot. It styling wise, it looks good. It fits a very slim niche in the Honda lineup, I think, because you've got the Pilot that covers both 2-row and 3-row. It's not too big, not too small. But then you've got the Passport that notches in between that and the CRV, which, you know, it is significantly smaller than the Pilot, but it's not that much smaller than this Passport, or is it? Are looks deceiving?
It's actually quite a bit smaller than the Passport. You know, and I think, you know, the Passport kind of symbolizes something we're going to see a lot more of over the next year or two. And we've already started seeing it, but we're really going to see a lot more of it over the next couple of years as manufacturers start to come out with these sort of ruggedized crossovers, you know, the ones that are targeted, you know, at people, you know, I mean, in Honda's case, you know, they talk about it as being the adventure vehicle, you know, something that's a little more off-road oriented. And, you know, at least on paper, it is slightly more off-road oriented than a Pilot. You know, it sits on the same wheelbase as the Pilot, you know, I think about 111 inches, but, you know, it's 6 inches shorter. So they basically took length, you know, off the front and rear end, so you have a little bit better departure and approach angles with the thing, you know, but it doesn't have any more ground clearance than a Pilot does, and in fact, you know,
I think it does actually. It has almost an inch more ride height
than the Pilot.
Than the Pilot.
Really?
Yeah.
That's weird. Like. Maybe this is why people are having trouble placing it and going like, who's it for?
Well, you know, I mean, when you look at it, you know, it's proportions, you know, even though it's only 6 inches shorter, you know, its proportions make it certainly looks tidier, looks smaller than a Pilot does, because it's also a little bit taller.
Right.
It's a couple inches taller. The roof line is a little bit higher than a Pilot. You know, but I think probably the single biggest weakness of the Passport, and it was actually, I found it's, you know, surprisingly capable off-road driving it in Utah, you know, on these trails. But I think the one mistake they made was, unlike the Pilot, you know, the base trim level of the Pilot is on 18-inch wheels. On the Passports, all 4 trim levels of the Passport ride on 20-inch wheels with, you know, fairly low-profile tires, all-season tires, which, you know, I think if you're going to try and pitch this as your off-road adventure vehicle, and you should have at least one trim level that has smaller wheels with taller sidewalls, you know, and, you know, preferably, you know, even a little bit bigger rolling radius, so you have even a little bit more ground clearance, you know, so it is a little more capable off-road.
Yeah, I can see that. No, I agree. I was, again, very pleasantly surprised at its off-road capabilities. I mean, we were hitting speeds of 60 miles an hour on some of those dirt roads, and it was handling it really well. It was very sure-footed. A lot of fun to drive. It was quite capable, you know, in not significant off-roading. We're not talking Jeep territory, but enough that you could get to your campsite, you know, if you wanted to, or, you know, out. I think so, as a happily single, totally forgot to get married kind of girl, I actually feel like I'm a good target for this. The last thing I want to be in is a mommy mobile, and the Pilot is all about family. Lara Harrington, or Laura, actually, she pronounces it. Laura Harrington is the chief engineer on the Pilot and the Passport, and she's absolutely fabulous. Just fabulous looking, fabulous feeling, just has this amazing, wonderful energy about her. And she put it really well, I thought. She said that the Passport is more of a personal ownership vehicle, whereas the Pilot is more of a family or ownership vehicle. And to me, that really meant it's appealing to singles, to divorced, empty nesters, people that don't have child responsibilities every day.
it's got, 5 passengers, so you can bring your mom and dad if they need to go to the doctor or wherever, if you're just
or
taking
another
them out.
couple, bring your best friends.
Exactly.
Friends.
So
Who has friends?
so it's not about the family. And again, I talk a lot about marketing because marketing is really important. This is about that person that maybe isn't surrounded by a family. Maybe they do live alone, or they, have a significant other. So it's a personal ownership vehicle rather than a family-oriented vehicle.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because you can't get it with a third row.
Right.
If you want a third row, you've got to step up to the Pilot, or go to an Odyssey or something. So it's a 2-row only, and because they've only sliced 6 inches off of it. That means you actually do get some extra cargo space in the back. So it's got a lot of cargo space even behind that second row seat. And then if it's just you and one other person, you can drop the second row down and you can fit all kinds of stuff in there. You can even probably camp in the back there. I think it's probably long enough to camp back there. So I think it does have a lot of interesting potential. And, as you talked about earlier, with all the component sharing that happens, you don't actually have to sell that many of them.
Right.
You still benefit from the economies of scale. The number of actual unique parts in this thing from a Pilot or a Ridgeline or an Odyssey is actually, comparatively small. And it's, the most expensive bits are shared across all of those model lines. So, I think George Peterson and I were talking, and I think figured out based on what the stated capacity of the Honda's Lincoln, Alabama plant where they build this thing is, with the volumes they have for Odyssey, Pilot, and Ridgeline, they can probably do about 50,000 of these a year. And that's probably a pretty reasonable sales target for what they could sell. You could probably do about 50,000 passports a year.
Yeah, I think that's a great number, actually. I think, especially because, this, you look and think, well, what about the CRV? The CRV is something that I would have driven in my 30s. It's just funny, just psychologically, I want to be in something that is more substantial than that. And arguably more luxurious, although the passport's not particularly luxurious, but I feel like they will be able to sell 50,000 of these with no problem.
Yeah, and I suspect that, as they go along, in the second and third model years, we'll probably see some other variants. They'll probably tweak the, what equipment is in each one. And maybe there will be, maybe the touring version, will get a little more luxurious than it is today. And maybe we'll, the Sport will evolve into something that's a little more off-road oriented, that has a smaller wheel, with a bigger tire package and, maybe some skid plates as an option for those that actually want to use it that way.
I'm still just I'm still confused about, okay, so if it's not for the family buyer, because it's a 2-row SUV, I guess it's an SUV, but the Pilot...
It's an SUV.
I don't know, It
has significant ground clearance.
Yeah, it does, and I'm sure that it's got skid plates and it's rugged enough. But
no skid plates.
No skid plates.
No skid plates.
See, that's weird. Okay, so the people who really want these things for off road, they're not gonna. They'll pick a 4Runner because a 4Runner is a legit SUV, off roader. I don't think they're gonna crush up a Passport. So, okay. I'm still confused about who it's actually going to attract as a customer, and you'll find 50,000 of those people. I don't doubt, but I just want to see who they are.
It is that person that wants the idea that they can go off road. They may not actually go off road.
Oh, the Wrangler buyer.
Exactly. It is. It really is for. I see it as somebody whose version of off-road is to go to, an Airbnb someplace or to, a tiny house. You know, there is it is towing capacity. There is some towing capacity to it as well. 5,000 pounds, right?
That's not much. I mean, that's more than just about anybody's going to use, I think. I think that's Ridgeline towing capacity, right?
It's Ridgeline towing capacity, but I mean, that's enough, to haul a couple of jet skis or a small boat,
a snowmobile, or something. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. And again, it's somebody that doesn't need a pilot, but still wants to do some light off-roading. So, it comes there's Honda accessories, or the adventure pack with the trailer hitch and harness. You've got an urban package which has a little bit more rugged, like front and rear spoilers and such. So they're kind of setting it up for that person that has an active lifestyle, but doesn't necessarily have a family. As I said, they want something more rugged than a CRV, but they don't want anything like the Pilot.
Right. And, to my complaints about, the wheels and tires that they put on here and the lack of skid plates, Honda did say that they have worked with their partners at J Sport, and there is there will be a dealer installed accessory package available that addresses a lot of that.
Of course, because that's one thing that Honda and Toyota are both brilliant at, and I think they got it from like BMW and Mercedes. Like, oh yes, you can have that. It's dealer installed and it's extra.
Yeah.
All right. So overall, though, it sounds like it's a positive impression that it left.
Yeah, and yes. I think a big part of what makes it, despite the tires that are on it, stock, I think a big part of what makes it as capable as it is off road is the torque vectoring all-wheel drive system, which mechanically is the same. It's the same hardware that you'll find on Acuras with super handling all-wheel drive. On Hondas, they call it IVMT4, I think, Intelligent Vehicle or IVTM4, something like that.
That's terrible.
But it's calibrated differently. It's controlled a little bit differently to make it more, off-road capable, as opposed to the more performance-oriented setup that's on the Acuras. But it's the same hardware that works really, really well, and it can adjust the torque front to rear and side to side, and send it where it needs to be. And even on some pretty slick surfaces that we drove on, it put the power down where it needed it to be, and kept it surprisingly stable.
Yeah, I wasn't crazy about the process to change it from the different modes. It has like sand. It was sand, snow, mud.
And normal.
And it felt clumsy. Like I'd much rather have a knob that you can just go from one to the other. That was I think the only thing that I didn't love about it was, and maybe you don't go from different. We happened to be going, because of where we were and because of the weather, we were literally going from snow to mud to sand, and you don't do that very often. But I still, like even in the Compass that I had a couple weeks ago, as I mentioned earlier, it was originally in 2-wheel drive. I was able to throw it very easily into 4-wheel drive, and then I could have gotten even more aggressive. But it was right there. It was very intuitive and it was very easy to do. In the Passport, it required going into the menu, selecting it. It was, you could always tell when we were in a lead follow formation, you could always tell the person that was changing the mode because there was a hesitation there.
Yeah.
So I wish.
But once you switched it worked well though.
I'm sorry?
So once you switched it worked well. I mean, it did. It's just a push button. You just have to push, and wait a second for it to change modes, and toggle through the modes.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. I agree. I think, a rotary controller, would probably be preferable there.
Yeah, I would have preferred that personally.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, once we start to get them out in the fleet, I'll be able to give my completely unvarnished opinion about it.
I do. I mean, I really do think, though, that there is room. Honda also mentioned that they were losing about 35,000 customers because they did not have this type of vehicle, which I thought was really interesting, that they didn't have a 2-row capable all-wheel drive vehicle. Apparently, the CR-V does not suffice. So, their competitive intelligence tells them that they're losing customers because they don't have this vehicle. So it'll be very interesting to see if they're able to keep customers in the brand.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a good play for them, especially because they know how to do the platform sharing pretty well. So, if they have designed this program to work at 35,000 units and they sell 50, they're going to be doing fine. So
yes, exactly. And just I don't think we talked about price at all. So the Sport is just under 32,000, which is the base, and then you add 2,000 for all-wheel drive. The bulk of it will be the EXL, which goes for 36,000. The Touring at 39,000, and then the Elite, comes with four-wheel drive, is just under 44,000. So, it's the average vehicle's in that $35,000 range. So it's a little bit more than that, but I think it's still a Honda. You're still getting great reliability. You're getting the Honda Sensing. I think those are really well-equipped vehicles for that price point.
Yeah, and like most new Hondas now, the sensing package is standard equipment, so you don't have to pay extra for that,
which is great.
Yeah.
All right. Did we want to talk about any questions, or have we?
Let me just quickly address Howard Katz's question.
Okay.
He actually sent me an email the other day. He had seen some stuff on the new BMW X5 xDrive 45e iPerformance. And BMW clearly has not given up on their ridiculous nomenclature. So this is the new X5 plug-in hybrid, basically. And they haven't got the all the EPA figures yet for this thing, and they haven't given a lot of detail on things like battery size and so on. But in the press release for this thing, talked about this thing getting 2.1 liters per 100 kilometers fuel efficiency, which is about 112 miles per gallon. And the CO2 figure is like 49 grams per kilometer. It's got a 69 liter fuel tank, and Howard was trying to figure out the range of this thing, and based just on those numbers, he worked out that this thing could potentially theoretically have a range of 2,047 miles on a single tank of fuel and a fully charged battery, which actually is almost certainly not accurate. And so I just wanted to talk briefly about kind of how they work these things out. That 2.1 liters per 100 kilometers, that 112 miles per gallon, is actually probably the combined fuel economy figure, based on some percentage, of a full charge of the battery, which I think they haven't really said specifically, but it sounds like it's about a 30-mile electric range on this thing. So it's probably about a 16 or 18 kilowatt hour battery. And then, so it's based probably on about a 50 or so mile, driving cycle, getting that 112 miles per gallon. So 30 miles with no gas, just on the battery, and then the rest on the fuel. And so, and what they do with these things, and this is a problem that goes back to when GM launched the original Volt back in 2010. They spent a long time going back and forth with EPA, trying to figure out, okay, so how are we gonna label this thing? And so it was a long time issue with plug-in hybrids, trying to figure out what, when we calculate the fuel economy of these things, how are we going to do it? And EPA ended up doing a bunch of studies and looking at how people actually drive, how far they drive, and so on. And then based on the range, they estimated that in general, in a plug-in hybrid, people are going to do about roughly 2/3 of their miles on electricity, and the rest on gas. And then so there's this complicated formula, but that's basically how it works out. So it's kind of a weighted average, 2/3 electric and 1/3 gas, for a plug-in hybrid with this kind of range. If it's got a smaller battery like the previous Gen X5, which only had about 14 miles of range, then that percentage on electricity is going to be a lot smaller, and you're going to use more gas, and so that combined figure is going to be a lot different. But realistically, the driving range on this thing for one tank of gas and a full charge of the battery is probably going to be somewhere between 500 and 600 miles, not 2,000 miles.
That's a
I'm
lot
glad
of
you
miles,
addressed.
though. 600 miles feels like 2,000 if you do it in one shot.
Depends how much coffee you're drinking.
Yeah, well, yeah. Like, honestly, realistically, you have to stop like every 200, 250.
Yeah, and that's kind of why for EVs, kind of that between 200 and 300 mile range, for most EVs is probably going to be sufficient for everybody, as long as you for road trips, as long as you have access to some reasonably fast charging, and as we get into 150 kilowatt hour charging stations and 350 when the Porsche Taycan comes out, you're going to be able to charge up, in 15 minutes or less, get mostly a full charge in that time frame, which is, by the time you go to the bathroom and get another cup of coffee, your battery's full again.
Yeah, the Audi e-tron's about 25 minutes for an 80% charge.
Yeah, and that's 150 kilowatts, I think.
Yes, exactly. I drove that. I drove that in Abu Dhabi.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
What did you think of it?
Well, we can talk about it in the next show if you want to, but
okay.
I loved it. Okay. I loved it.
Yeah, let's come back to that one.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's a good ending point then. So this has been Wheelbearings 95. So Rebecca, thanks for joining us and sticking it out into the late evening.
Thank you.
We'll have to play around with recording times just so that we're not killing you going past everybody's bedtime. But yeah, thanks for coming on the show and sort of bringing a different perspective. I think as the conversation shows, it's a bunch of expertise that neither Sam nor I possess, and I think it actually makes things an interesting balance to just our Waldorf and Statler from the balcony of the Muppet Show yelling. So hopefully,
well, thank you for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Excellent. Well, come back next time. And you as well, listeners. In the meantime, hit us up and let us know how we're doing, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.